A serious political leader cannot simply decide to turn his back on a huge number of his fellow citizens because he personally dislikes their views. Alexei Navalny Patriot, a memoir. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Audio. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Alexei Navalny was one of the most well-known and outspoken critics of Vladimir Putin since the early 2000s. It's not just Putin, though. It's the entire apparatus of Russian corruption that Navalny was exposing. And I say he was all of this. He is all of this, because he was reportedly killed in 2024 while in prison serving a bogus sentence. Today we're reviewing the memoir he wrote almost entirely while in prison and after he was poisoned in 2020. It's called Patriot, and it's one of the most absorbing books I've read all year. The audiobook is about 16 hours long. It's impeccably narrated by Matthew Good, the English version anyways, and it's available on Sela in human narrated audio.
Dying really didn't hurt. If I hadn't been breathing my last, I would never have stretched out on the floor next to the plane's toilet. As you can imagine, it wasn't exactly clean. I was flying to Moscow from Tomsk in Siberia and feeling very pleased. Regional elections were going to be held in 2 weeks in several Siberian cities, and my colleagues from the Anti-Corruption Foundation, the ACF, and I had every intention of inflicting defeat on the ruling United Russia Party. That would deliver an important message that Vladimir Putin, even after 20 years in power, was not omnipotent or even particularly liked in that part of Russia, even though large numbers of people there would watch talking heads sing the praises of the nation's leader on television 24/7. For several years, I had been banned from running for office. The state did not recognize the political party I led and had recently refused to register it for the 9th time in 8 years.
Rami Almathan is with me. Rams, how's it going?
Hey, really, I second all that, by the way. Excellent book.
It's the second half of the book where he has correspondences from prison that make this book not perfect for me, but we will get to that. But that's the short version of my thoughts. So I want to get the short version of your thoughts.
Okay, so you're saying, sorry, just to clarify your thoughts, the second half was the least compelling part?
Yeah,
or the lesser of the two halves?
Definitely. Significantly lesser of the two halves.
Absolutely the opposite opinion then. The first half was great. It was a great primer on the situation, on Russia, on Russian politics, on his life, on everything, kind of contextualizing why the second half is important. But the second half to me was like a real memoir. Like, it was just unfiltered. It was journaling. It was just scrap it, like write it down on scrap paper and publish it, but in such a deep way. It was totally fantastic.
Interesting. So it was a huge change of pace, and we disagree on whether the effect was what it should have been. Mm-hmm. So we have Sara Hillis with us. Sara, you can be the tiebreaker here. What did you think of the second half and how it affected the book?
I have to say that the reason I agree with Ramya on this one is because it mirrored his actual life experience. So the first half, he had some time to kind of, actually the amount that he wrote before he needed to keep these diaries was, I think he wrote some of it in prison too, but it was kind of astonishing, the amount of stuff he was able to sit down and write.
Yep.
Just recovering from his poisoning and all that kind of stuff. So he switches very abruptly, and he actually talks about it in this very meta narrative way. Usually fiction novels will do this when a new thing comes into your life, that kind of thing. And so he points out that this is a different direction that he's going in, which I appreciate. And then when you do get to the prison diaries and the prison Instagram posts and other things that we have, it's so real. It's so cinema verite kind of, absolutely, as Rami said, unfiltered. It's psychological.
Yes.
It's you get a sense of how the prison is affecting him in ways that I thought would be different. I thought it would be more about deprivations. There's some of that, but most of it is about the weird rules and how psychologically damaging the weird rules were, which I just thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
And he doesn't outright tell you that the psychological
No, we're doing the
toll
analyzing.
is affecting. Well, let me do this, please. that like he doesn't directly tell you that the psychological toll is damaging him. You just see it in the way that he's writing, because the entire first half of the book is structured and well put together and thoughtful and extremely educational. You learn a lot, and you can see that he's a really smart, intelligent person, Navalny is. But then you get to the second half and he's lamenting like the way people are cooking pancakes on TV and like laughing at arguments of like two old Russian prisoners arguing about how old Billie Eilish is. And it's like, you could be doing so much more with your life right now. But instead he's languishing in prison, being somewhat oblivious to what's going on around him. And we know what's happening around him, but he's lost in this world of prison. And I just wish I had more of what the first half was, which I thought was way more riveting. But the second half with the prison diaries, they were interesting in a way that it was hard to put down. I need to know what happens, but it was a drag. And a lot of it felt unnecessary and like it was written out of boredom. But that's exactly what it was, because he was in prison and had nothing to do.
But that wasn't fascinating to you? Like,
Not
to
as much
me-
as the first half. Not as much as the first half.
Because
Not
I
even
agree
close.
with you. The first half is very structured. It gives us, like I said, primer to understanding why the second half is important. But do you remember that transitional period when he was going into prison, or when he was kind of coming to terms with being in prison? And there was a few moments of this kind of thing anyway, but there was a part where he was just like, well, this is part of it as well. You know, there are no regrets. I know that this is part of what needs to happen. I need to sit here and be in prison as part of the journey, because it's bigger than him. It's bigger than his personal experience. It's bigger than him not being in prison or being let out to continue his work out there. There's something like purely acceptant about what he was experiencing in prison, which was just one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one walk around the yard at a time, one letter at a time, as he was responding to thousands and thousands of letters from people. And a lot of that, to me, going back to Sarah, what you're emphasizing, the psychological effect is purely him being like, this is part of it.
Yeah. The thing I found fascinating is he's about maybe 2 years older than me. He was about 2 years older than me, born in 76. I was born in 78. He shares the same faith as me, maybe in an odd, quirky Alexei Navalny sort of way, but he is Orthodox Christian, and discussing, even things like what should I do for Lent? Like, it sounds, because we have these rules: you don't eat meat and dairy and eggs during Lent, and so he had to try to fast in prison, which was hard, and also. But at the same time, he went through the same struggles that I go through every year during Lent. Like, it was prison related, but I could identify with it so well. And I just thought that was so cool.
He does seem to go out of his way to humanize himself and make himself be more than just a political figure. Like, we know that he loves cartoons and Rick and Morty and makes a lot of Harry Potter references, surprisingly. His favorite movie is Terminator, which, side note, he did have a public funeral after they brought his body back to Moscow, and as they were bringing the coffin down, they were playing the soundtrack to Terminator because that's what he wanted. So he's kind of a quirky guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you...
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, where do you guys want to go with this? Because when you said he's had a lot of this humanizing character in him, I reflect back to the scene where he's in the, I guess the cop car, being dragged to one prison or another. It might have been the first time he got imprisoned, and he wanted to cry but wouldn't allow the journalist of letting him see that, or them seeing him at that point of weakness, and he had to be tough. Even though he's apparently very highly emotional and everything brings him to tears, he didn't want them to have the benefit of seeing Alexei cry and having an emotional breakdown on the way too.
And I think too, it was partly because he had a specific reason for wanting to cry, but he thought they might misconstrue it and say that, you know, he was like repentant for his crimes or whatever. And I don't think he wanted that to happen too, for sure. Right. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, that's sometimes you have to make those choices, and that's still being quite human. You're just trying, you're sort of trying to hide that from people. And then later he kind of comes to realization and says, this is me, this is who I am. Like, I need to just be me.
I need to add that this book is very much present in the context in which it was written. And what I mean by that is that you're always made aware of how this book came together, because he makes it clear right off the bat that the first half of this book was written while he was in the hospital in Germany after he was poisoned by a nerve agent. And then he felt the need to start his memoir right then and there. Maybe because he had some sort of some midlife crisis, feeling that he was in danger and needed to get his thoughts out there. And then there's a massive shift in tone when he finally gets sent to prison, when he goes back to Russia. And the first words of the chapter was, wow, well, this book took a turn, because he was now in prison. And he had to adjust the way that he was going to write this book and finish it. And the last little bit of the chapter that he explains how he got in prison, basically the first chapter where he writes in prison, this is an excerpt. I wanted to read it because it points out like the immediacy of this book and how you feel like you're there with him. Give me a book, please. Fill in a request to the library tomorrow. What about now? There's nothing to do. It's boring. It's not possible now. Can I have a newspaper? No. I wondered what I was going to do for the rest of the evening. I knew the regulations would not allow me just to go to bed and sleep. Can you at least give me a pen and some paper? That we can. And that is how I came to write this chapter. And it puts you right there in prison with him. This dude wrote that entire chapter, which is very lengthy, on pen and paper and smuggled it out through his lawyers soon after.
Again, I'm very cognizant of the fact that this is a translation, right? It is a translation, right? I'm not making that up.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think like when I think it was exquisitely written, I don't even know if it's fair to say that because we don't know what it sounds like in its original form. But the translation was excellent. I thought this book was so well written. The way that he jumps from like Instagram posts to prose and briefing us on the political situation, on his thoughts and perspectives versus like, these are the facts. This is how it is right now. This is what I've been fighting for. This is what the people have been fighting for. Then going into the romance and the heartbreaks and the personal side of things, to then screaming and yelling at a security guard, to poetry, to whatever. Like, it's just been, it kind of gives you everything, and everything I thought was done well.
You mentioned the part where he screams at a security guard, and he gets very visibly angry.
Yes.
During a lot of these sections, and understandably so. He's also funny and sarcastic and like kind of a smartass, and sometimes he's very touching and talks lovingly about his wife Yulia. And like you said, you just get a little bit of everything, and it seems like he was not shy to be honest. And that includes the bad things. He calls himself stupid on multiple occasions. He expresses a lot of regret. One of the points where he calls himself stupid is that he was told by a guard that the refrigerator in his cell, or the fridge in his cell, you can use the top shelf as a freezer. And he goes, oh, and then spends a ton of his money on ice cream to test it out. And then he realizes, I didn't need to do that. I could have just put water in a plate.
Oh, that was the thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
do you
I
say
want to read a little excerpt to showcase a little bit of his humor. It seems uniquely Russian to listen to this. I urged all the reporters to let us through. Oh, the context is that this was while he was in an airplane on the way back to Russia, and there were tons of reporters and it just crowding everyone, and it was very uncomfortable. I urged all the reporters to let us through. The media, however, are having none of it, continuing to shoot video in case I do something interesting. What are they expecting? A backflip? A comic song that I will rip up a picture of Putin and eat the pieces? He has a ton of moments like that where he goes a little bit
Rogue.
a little rogue.
I love those moments though.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Did you okay, so the beginning of the book is when he's kind of walking us through the experience of being poisoned, right? That part was fascinating to me. I feel like it would make for excellent case study in a medical journal, just the way he described the experience as he's going through. It was so, like, I don't know, well expressed, well detailed, clear. And I was thinking, I wish I could describe anything the way that he described. Like, I'm going to the doctor's, like, I don't know, it's a pain. And he was just able to break it down conceptually in such a clean manner. I'm sure he, this wasn't his first draft, but it just makes so much sense. And I wondered if that, like, stood out to you guys.
I found out after the fact, doing some research, that apparently when Navalny was speaking about what it felt like to go through that nerve agents poisoning, he said that because he was videotaped screaming on the plane, and he said he wasn't screaming out of pain at that time. He was screaming because he knew he was dying, which is very different than screaming out of pain. I couldn't find the actual video in question, though.
Okay.
Yeah, the minute I started reading that, and the minute he was able to express how the nerve agent was messing with his very consciousness, his very selfhood almost. Well, not almost, really. I was like, okay, this guy is a writer. This guy is not just, he didn't just record stuff on a tape and somebody else wrote it. That this was this guy writing this. And I was like, okay, I'm in, I'm going,
Yeah.
Something else I discovered while doing some research after the fact is that it seems like a lot was left out about Navalny's life because he's been active since the mid-2000s, early 2000s, and he's done a lot. And he's been known for doing all sorts of outrageous things. And I was blown away at a lot of things that were included in here, just how often he was put in incredibly dangerous situations, in very hostile crowds, being in situations where his people are pulling him by the arms and the police are pulling him by the feet, and it's like he's getting ripped apart. He's had green antiseptic thrown in his face that was mixed with acid, which burned 80% of his retina, and still did his live stream with a bunch of gooey green stuff on his face, which then eventually became like a symbol of opposition in Russia, where people would paint their face green in solidarity. He's an absolute legend.
He's a goat. And the thing is, too, like, he's had a lot of political association or interference, if you will, because he's anti-corruption, right? For a very long time. But there were parts in the book that I thought was, he showed a lot of humility, where he was like, I don't have to be running for the leadership position here. I don't have to be the one representing. I can't anymore. Like, there were times when he was banned from running for office, but he was still, again, going back to that original sentiment I talked about with the whole prison part of it, that it was this cause was beyond him. And for me, that passage that really struck that chord in this sentiment was when he described Russia, when he described the Russian people. And he said, the Russian people are actually jolly, or something along those lines. And then proceeded to explain why it's not the people, it's not the philosophies, it's not the brilliance of the Russian people, but it's everything else. It's the way that things have been run for decades, and how instead of thriving, we're all just trying to survive. And it was so deep to explain his position, right? To explain why he continues to do what he does, why he continues to put himself in absolute danger, his family in danger, the people in danger, because to him it's that big.
He urges people to separate the Russian regime of Putin to the Russian people.
Yes.
And there's a big difference there. And he talks a lot about people making jokes and smiling and being friendly, which I don't know what this says about me and my stereotype of Russians. And I don't picture Russians as laughing and making jokes. It doesn't seem like their style.
Yeah, it's a very subtle, like I know several Russian people, and I would say it's very subtle until you get to know them. They're pretty much, and it's not just Russian people, but I mean, that's part of, there's a bit of a cultural reserve there.
Yes, yeah.
To illustrate your point, Ramya, he doesn't just talk about Russia and the culture and like the vibe around Russia. He talks about the USSR because he grew up in it, and he had this amazing excerpt, which he's actually quoting somebody else in it, but I thought it was really poignant. This is one of those sections where when I read it, I went, "That's really well put. That's beautiful." Here it is. What was the point of these lies? Describing the way the Soviet Union worked, Vasily Shukshin, a Russian writer, memorably said, "Lies, lies, lies. Lies as redemption, lies as atonement for guilt, lies as a goal achieved, lies as a career, as prosperity, as medals, as an apartment, lies. The whole of Russia was covered with lies like a scab." This whole section on the Soviet Union, he had a whole chapter about it near the start. I'm a huge fan of fantasy, and I love world building in places that feel very different to our own, completely out of this world. If I didn't know the Soviet Union was real, I would have thought this is amazing world building. This is the coolest. I don't know who comes up with this stuff.
Ooh.
Like this author is a genius.
That's
the Soviet
a hot
Union, it
take.
doesn't feel real. It
so
feels like somebody made it up.
You're so young, Jacob.
That's true. I was born in 96 after it fell. So
Bring
it's
us back
true.
to earth, Sarah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I obviously didn't live in the Soviet Union, but I remember Chernobyl, and I remember, I mean, I was pretty young, but I still like kind of remember the stupidity of it. Like there's a kind of a cool HBO series called Chernobyl, actually a miniseries.
It's great.
And the stupidity of it was like they were trying to pretend like nothing happened, and everybody else in the whole world knew that stuff had happened.
Right.
But like they're like, no, just keep doing your farm your radioactive potatoes. Go ahead, do it. You know? Like, I mean, so crazy. And I liked that he included that because he draws a direct through line, which I always thought was there, but from the Soviet Union to Putin and the way he does things.
Yes. And that radioactive fish they had to bury in the forest. That was tough.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, that was tough.
Do you want to tell that story? Do you want to share that one, that anecdote?
Yeah, well, what was it? They said absolutely under no circumstances are you to have anything, right? And especially not to ship. Wasn't that the case? They were like, you can't mail anything.
That's from Chernobyl. That was around Chernobyl. Like, you are not to take anything
villages.
out of that area.
Yeah.
Then somebody
Yeah.
sent dried fish. to
Right,
Moscow.
the grandmother
The grandmother sent
who's like,
dried
my
fish to
son
Moscow.
loves fish. We're gonna make it for dinner, and Dad's like, hell yeah, I'm gonna have it with a glass of beer. But then mothers, as usual, Mom was like, no, take out your the detector,
Dosimeter, whatever.
Yeah, the Geiger counter.
Yeah, and there was enough radioactive activity in that fish that they had mailed to think that an atomic bomb or whatever was like directly aimed at it, so they had to go
Which
bury it in the forest.
the point of that story was to illustrate that they were still operating the delivery of mail like nothing happened.
Yeah.
This was Chernobyl. And they were like, nope, business as usual. Nothing's wrong here. But that's the nature of what the Soviet Union was like. Lies, 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 like it was a scab everywhere.
Lies.
And
Yeah.
I have so many excerpts from this book. I need to read this one too.
Go, because we need to talk about narrator as well.
Okay. This one blew my mind though, because I never heard corruption put this way and how it seems to reinforce itself. And it's incredible to break out of it because you get sucked into it. Let me read this. It quickly became obvious that in a corrupt environment, you yourself are forced to behave corruptly, even if all you want is to help people. For example, I remember we asked the Minister of Natural Defense for money, not for us, but for our region. The minister said to Bielik, "You know, someone there offended one of our people. Regarding the tinder he wanted, please help sort this out." Bielik said to me, "Please help sort this out." That is, I was being asked to come up with some sort of dodgy arrangement under which the minister's pal will be given extra timber, and in return, the minister would allocate state funds to Kiev region. I said I wanted nothing to do with it. That was the only way issues could get resolved. Every time you wanted to do something good, you had to do something bad. Maybe not for your own benefit, but for somebody else's. Before you know it, you find yourself engaging in corrupt behavior from morning to night. And if you're behaving corruptly for the benefit of someone else, why would it not be okay to do a little bit of the same for yourself? The system soon follows you. Basically, you see people acting corruptly like it was nothing, and so you see that and go, well, I guess being corrupt is not a big deal. I'm going to do it myself. If they're doing it and nothing's happening, then I'm going to do it myself. Doesn't matter. It's like peer pressure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Peer pressure, and that you're so far from, because what he keeps talking about is the truth, right? It's the truth that he lives for. It's the truth that we need to fight for. It's the truth, the truth, the truth. All his last speeches, or whatever he called them, final speeches, were around that. But they're so far from the truth. And this is true for any country that faces corruption in whatever form, big or small, is that you dig yourself deeper and deeper and further from the truth. And it's tough. Like, I'm from Sri Lanka, and there's a lot of this civil war history and corruption as well. And it's the same kind of relatable notion. It's interesting. He says everything so brilliantly and so, relatably. Do you guys want to talk about the narration?
Yeah, because we
Sarah?
don't have much time.
Yeah,
So
go.
this is just he's just totally great. Matthew Good, he played Tony Armstrong Jones in The Crown. Like, I love Matthew Good, and so he narrates this book, and the thing I love about his narration is that he totally gets the ironic, sarcastic,
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
Turn of phrase that Alexei has, and he brings it to life in such a lovely way. I think the Russian pronunciations are not always consistent, so I don't know what the right ones would be, because there was a couple different ways he pronounced a few things, but like, I wouldn't want to be the one reading them, so okay, I'll give him a pass on that one. But no, he can do all the different emotions, of course, being an actor, of course he can, and he's just got this lovely British accent, and it's he doesn't try to do any Russian accents or anything dumb like that. Which is good.
It's like, I get the complaint that in a book like this from a famous Russian figure like Alexei Navalny, you would want his memoir to be narrated by someone who's familiar with Russian, with the pronunciations. But it's also the English translation.
Yeah.
Like, we can probably chill a little bit on that. And it's not like his Russian pronunciations were terrible or anything. He clearly did the work to make it right. But speaking of the translation, a funny quirk was that Navalny often used the word dude. Did you guys notice that? The dudes put me in my cell. Oh, he was a really funny dude. They use the word dude all the time. Is there
I didn't even hear that.
a comparable word in Russian?
I think there is. I can't remember what it is, but I think there is a word that to just get it for a modern English ear would probably be the best. The best word to use, kind of
compensate. I didn't hear that, but near the end when he was in prison, and I was wondering if it was just because he was getting real tired of writing actual words, but there was a lot of ha-ha-haing. Just like literal.
I noticed that. Yeah, he just
ha-ha.
found things funny. Yeah, the narrator would literally say ha ha ha.
Yeah.
When it
A
wasn't
lot.
even that funny.
A lot. It was a lot.
Well, 'cause
That
he
was my actual one complaint about this book.
He was descending into madness. You
I
have
think
to give
so.
him some sympathy.
Subtly. That's, I think, what the point was. Yeah.
Also, shout out that he compared Vladimir Putin to Voldemort. That was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there are so many great Harry Potter references. He not only gave us all the best of the politics, but all the best of Harry Potter. Thank you.
Yeah,
Melanie.
he described the feeling of being poisoned by a nerve agent to the kiss of the Dementors that suck out, who just bring you all the despair in the world and suck out your soul. That's what he said it felt like.
He did a compare and contrast.
Tolkien too.
Yes,
I mean, yeah,
that's
go
right.
on, go on.
Yeah.
Do it.
Go on, King. Anyways, to wrap things up, I highly recommend this one. Even though I wasn't super thrilled with the second part because it was a bit of a slog, even though it was hard to stop reading, it was just to me, a noticeable drop in quality. I could have taken a lot more
I disagree
of that
completely.
first half. Okay, well,
Listen
you
to
can
it for the
take
second
my
half.
word
It's
or
so good.
Rania's word. Okay,
Or
fine.
Sarah's word.
What about you,
Listen
Sarah?
to the whole book. Just listen to the whole book. I think this is an important book. Everybody should probably read because it shows us a lot of what's going on in the world today. And yeah, it's
And
Yeah.
you know, if you want to learn more about Russian culture and Russian politics, I'd encourage you to read more than just this book. This is a great introduction, but there's a lot of context there.
And it is not objective. This is
Of course
not an
not. Of
objective
course
account.
not.
This
He
is
openly says that he hates Putin. He says
Yeah.
it multiple
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
That's the furthest thing from objective.
This is This is one side of the story though, for sure.
Anyways, I want to thank you both so much for actually choosing to read this one. And it's a bit daunting, like a political memoir like this. Not a short one either. It's not exactly the easiest one to read too, but it was well worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
yeah.
That was Sara Hillis, a regular contributor to AMI Audiobook Review and AMI's Rami Amathan. I'm Jacob Sheminsky, and that's all the time we have for AMI Audiobook Review. You can check us out wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and comment on our videos and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Thanks for listening.